everybody. Welcome back to Every Day is Saturday. I'm Matt Stahl, along with my partner, Brad Gatto. And we're going to talk about a very exciting topic today. We think it's exciting.
We do. We joke about this all the time.
You're supposed to jump in.
Yeah.
Social
this is
Security.
good. It affects everybody.
It does affect everybody.
Every topic that affects everybody is a good topic to talk about.
May not be exciting to some, but it's very important.
Yeah, Social Security has been around for a bit, so we should probably talk about it. And so today we're going to talk about kind of the history of Social Security and what it is and what it isn't. And then we're just going to end with the three most common mistakes as we see it in the families that we work with and in how they think about Social Security, file for Social Security, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Before we jump in, what have you been up to?
This.
Work.
A lot of work. I got a trip coming up, so I get to go away with my wife for a little bit, which is exciting, but a lot of work and a lot of baseball. I don't know. We had 12 games last weekend.
Oh my gosh.
Between two boys. So there you go. That's what I'm up to.
Yeah.
How about you?
I think you know my answer.
Yeah. Soccer.
Yes.
Welcome to Every Day is Saturday, where we talk about baseball and soccer.
We have three boys. Technically, all four of our kids are in soccer right now.
Oh boy.
The three older boys have a bit more demanding schedule, which is a lot of fun. And I've been working as well. So
that was exciting.
Yes.
We're very excited with the same updates all the time.
Let's see what else.
So let's get into the more exciting topic of Social Security.
Let's do it.
Let's start with a little bit of the history.
Yeah.
this is my favorite part of everything.
I know
it's the history part of everything. So if you don't mind, I would like to.
Yes, I'll give you
to jump in. And if I make any mistakes, you can be there to correct me.
That's right.
So Social Security was response, as are most of our current social welfare programs. I have a hard time saying that. To the Great Depression.
Nailed it.
Right? So went through the Great Depression, had no safety net in place for people. And so FDR and his administration started putting in all these social welfare programs. Social Security was one of them. Social Security was enacted in 1935. The first check went out, I believe, in 1941. That said, it was meant to be an end-of-life benefit to try to help the average American with kind of that last phase of life when maybe a little too old to work. And of course, back then in the 1930s, most jobs back then were labor jobs, right? Yeah. It's not that desk jobs didn't exist, but far more people were laborers back then than are today. And so the physically demanding toll of work was there. And so Social Security was supposed to be that safety net for kind of end of life. So that's when it started. 1941, the first check goes out. The woman who got the first check is very famous.
1940.
40.
You're close. You said 39. You said 41. So we'll split the difference.
Okay, 40. It was 1940. She's very famous because she's the first ever person to ever receive a check. Her name is Ida Mae Fuller. Did I get that right?
You did.
Yes. Do you have the exact numbers? Are you gonna?
Yes.
You're gonna fact check? Okay, I'm gonna see if I can't come up with the numbers.
That was my plan.
She paid into Social Security for a very short amount of time before she started collecting her first benefit, which was true of most people, right? Because it was brand new. So how long could you have possibly paid in before you actually got to receive benefit? She paid in $24.88.
I have 75.
Well, then you're right. I'm just making. I'm going off of memory of when I read this.
That's a nice,
years
easy
ago.
round number though. So
$24.75. Yep. Her first monthly check she got was 24 or something.
I don't know that exact number. I just know the total. It was 24 something.
Yeah, per month. So basically, her first check paid her back for everything she had paid in on her first monthly check. Ida Mae Fuller lived to be 100. Is that right?
That is right.
Yeah. I have no idea the total sum of money she got back out of the Social Security system.
I'm going to round it to the nearest dollar. $22,889.
That is a pretty good ROI.
She just about
return on investment.
About 1,000x to her investment.
That's pretty good.
Yes.
Not bad. So. I wonder, I doubt it. I wonder if there's anybody that has a better return on investment in Social Security than Ida Mae Fuller.
I would doubt. That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer.
Do you suppose that the Brain Trust, the financial guys that kind of came up with the actuaries that did all the numbers to crunch to, part of the FDR administration were like, whoops. So there's a little bit of history. There's been some iterations, like over the years, like the core of Social Security remains the same, right? Some of the things that have changed in the 1970s, and I didn't look up the exact, I think it's 1971. I think it was the Nixon administration that added the cost of living adjustment to it. So it used to be that when you got whatever your paycheck was, Ida Mae Fuller's example, $22.75, that it was $22.75 until you passed away. There was no cost of living adjustment or pay raise associated. It was in the 1970s that they added that in. Some of the other things that have changed is filing ages, like when you can file, what your full retirement age is. stuff like that. But fundamentally, it's still the same system today as it was in 1935.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense. This is very basic, but how is it funded? It is all of you that earn income. Yes. Specifically you right now to a large degree. So as you're earning income, most simple example of this is a W-2 employee that works for a large corporation or any corporation. And when you look at your paycheck, you're going to see 6.2% of your income go to pay Social Security tax. Your employer is also paying 6.2%.
Or if you're self-employed.
If you're self-employed, then it gets a little more interesting. So you actually pay depending on how many steps you take, you could be paying double. Let's not get into the complications of how that can change.
So bottom line is everybody that's working, if you have earned income, you're paying into the Social Security Administration with the idea that when you retire, or maybe you're not even retired, you can not retire and collect Social Security. That once you reach the magical age of, in most cases, 62, you can begin the filing process should you want to. That said, Matt, talk a little bit about the funding, because there's a lot of fear these days around Social Security. In fact, we talk to a ton of retirees, and I get that a lot. Hey, you know what? Social Security's there. I'm not really banking on it. I think it's going to go away. You know, they open their statement. It says that on a such and such a date, it's not going to be funded anymore. What does all of that kind of boil down to? What's going on with Social Security as it relates to its funding? Yeah,
I think in the age of information, we live in a headline world, right? Yep. So we see that and we automatically think black and white and we go to zero.
Yep.
If this isn't 100% fund, then it's not going to exist. But fact of the matter is, the most updated numbers is, as of right now, that it will continue to be 100% funded through the year 2037.
So it's extended, actually. So if you look at that compared to where it was a couple of years ago, it's actually further down the line. It used to be 2033, 2034.
Yeah, which is a pretty significant jump in a short period of time.
Yep.
Now, the big reason for this
They must be buying their own government bonds.
Yeah. Yeah. We need our sound effect there. One big factor in this is just actuarial numbers. So what is the birth rate? And given that we have a lower birth rate, that it's actually stabilizing. Now, the number through 2037, it doesn't mean it just goes from 100% funded to zero.
This is important. This is the part that I really want everybody to make sure that they hear.
Yeah. So this is moving forward. The projection is actually, it would be 76% funded for a period of time. And then it's projected to stabilize after that point.
Yep.
And so looking at that gap, number one, there's a lot that can change between now and then, right?
Yep.
So number two, there have been some proposals put out there for how that gap can be addressed. And one of those would be a 13% reduction in the Social Security benefit for a period of time. The other could be a jump in payroll tax.
Yeah.
And the jump that, for example, is from 12.4% total to 14.4% total. So as an employee, I would feel a 1% jump to get that back to 100% funded for the next 75 years. So when we jump to conclusions by reading all these different headlines on where we see things, I think it's really important to remember this is not 100 to 0. In fact, it's actually looking better and better every year that goes by.
Well, and the other part that I want people to understand is the reason it goes from 100 to 75, 76 or whatever the number is because the reserves run out. Because right now, what's paying most of the benefit, over 75% of it, is the money coming in every year. All the people that are working, that are funding the benefits going out. So the money comes in and goes right back out. The other quarter of it, roughly, is being funded by the reserves. And the point that they're making is that by 2037, the reserves are going to be gone. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a workforce that are constantly paying into it every single year. And so as the math works out today anyway, the current workers will continue to fund every single year 75% of the benefit that is already going out. And so it doesn't go broke, right? To the extent that there's always people working. And to your point of they're watching numbers, how many people are filing, they know how many people are coming up that are eligible to file, all that kind of stuff. It's all factored in there. And interestingly enough, just looks a little bit better today than it did a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So
wait, we have a little bit of positive news to share.
There you go.
Look at that. We need another sound effect.
There you go. But this is a big part of the average American's retirement, right? You've paid into it for decades. Typically, most people have. And then, of course, why wouldn't you want your money back out of the system that you've paid into? But more importantly, it is a really foundational part of cash flow for retirees, because we're in this age where the pension is far less common, right? And so most of the people that we work with are self-funded, right? Their retirement is made up of their own 401ks and IRAs and things like that, and after-tax accounts, whatever it is that they have. And so this foundational kind of what we like to call mailbox money has become even more important because it's a non-volatile guaranteed paycheck that takes some weight or pressure off kind of these self-funded assets because we just don't have pensions. So it is very, very important. So it's important for you to know that it's not going away tomorrow. It's not going away next year. In fact, as the numbers show, for the people that are listening to this that care, they're filing soon or are already receiving benefit that even if you're 62 years old right now and you make it to 100, that's 38 more years. You fast forward 38 years and we're still not past the point of where they're currently saying we're going to run into an issue beyond that 75% base.
Right.
Okay. So with that being said, now that we know we have some good news, they might change something. They might make the people that are still working pay a little bit more to fund your benefit, maybe a partial reduction for a period of time, whatever it is. What we want to go over quickly is just the 3 most common mistakes that we see as it relates to how people think about Social Security or how they file for Social Security. Because it is so important, it is really important from the Department of Redundancy Department. I couldn't think of a different word to get it right. And certain thoughts that need to go into it. And so, Matt, what's the first most common mistake we see?
Yes. Can I point something out before we go to that?
I suppose.
So just to tie a bow on this, and we see so much negative news everywhere. Like this is, in my eyes, like an overwhelming positive thing to point out that the life expectancy when Social Security was put in place was 58 for males and 62 for females. And it was designed to kick in at 65.
Yeah.
We're almost 90 years later and we're talking about this being almost funded. That's actually pretty impressive.
Yeah. So, I bet they didn't foresee life expectancy being what it is now, especially when you just look at life expectancy relative to if you actually reach Social Security age, the average married couple age 60 has a joint life expectancy of 94, which is just a fancy way to say there's a 50-50 chance one of the two of them makes it 34 more years.
Yeah.
And they can file as early as 62. So I got to assume the actuaries weren't anticipating decades of payout when they enacted Social Security.
A little pat on the back for them.
Or they got lucky.
One or two. Okay. So,
and payroll tax has gone up.
Yes. So that's the positive side. Let's move on to those mistakes that you mentioned that we see. So there's 3 big mistakes.
There's more than that. But for today's podcast, we're going to do the top 3 as we see it. As we see it here at Fiat and the thousands of retirees that we've talked to over the years.
So let's start with the tax piece. And so depending on what your overall picture looks like, number one of the biggest mistakes we see when it comes to taxes is just not being aware of how Social Security is taxed. And
now the rest of the 1040 parlays into the taxes of your Social Security.
Right. So there's a lot of moving parts here. We're not going to be able to get through all this in a podcast to explain everything, but I think one thing to take away is just remembering the term combined income.
Yep.
Because that's really at the foundation of everything to figure out how, because there's a possibility that very little to zero of your Social Security income shows up in your tax return.
You mean provisional income, or are you talking
provisional
about
income? Yes.
Yeah. I just
So,
don't know if you're talking about a married couple and their combined income. So yeah, Social Security is taxed based on a provisional income calculation, which is made up of 4 components: half your benefit, all of your ordinary income, all of your capital gains, and any non-taxable interest. So you just take those 4 things, add it together. If it helps, I always tell people, look at your 1040, because if you look at where you file or where you write in your Social Security, it's line 6A on the front page of your 1040. And line 6A is the total benefit that came in. Line 6B, also Social Security, is how much of that's going to be taxed. Well, what slides over there is based on your provisional income calculation and the thresholds that you have to apply. Now, I'm not going to go through all that in today's podcast. The net result of it is this: you're going to pay federal taxes on somewhere between 0 and 85% of your benefit. So a couple things to take away from that. There are some people that don't pay any taxes on their federally on their Social Security. And there are some people that pay taxes on up to 85% of their benefit. That's the high end. In other words, there's nobody that pays taxes on 100% of the benefit. Well, if you think through those four components, half of your Social Security benefit, all of your ordinary income, all of your capital gains, non-taxable interest, what you have coming in the door and the money you live on in retirement determines how your Social Security is going to be taxed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important to keep in mind when you file what the rest of your life is going to look like. And so boiling that down to this, the most common mistake is they file based solely on kind of the financial aspect of it. They don't think about the tax aspect of it. And we run into situations, Matt, where if things had been moved around or shifted around, or we pulled $1 out of this bucket instead of that bucket to live on, from a tax perspective, your overall tax liability in your Social Security could go down, and frankly could go down significantly. And with some of the families we've worked with, just to be very frank, we've gotten their Social Security to go from mostly taxable, in that 70 to 85% range of it being taxed at whatever your tax rates are, to zero.
Yep.
Based on moving retirement accounts around and changing tax status on retirement accounts. And so vitally important, bottom line, if you are unfamiliar with how your Social Security is taxed, if you are unfamiliar with how much of your benefit is being taxed, or if you can't answer the question of, is there anything I could do to lower my tax bill on my Social Security? Those are all things we can help you with, help you answer those questions. And I think it's vitally important that everybody look into that, because it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep, right? You don't get to spend the gross amount. You only get to spend the net amount after you pay the IRS. And so, of course, if we can get that net number to be higher, it makes a big difference.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to number 2. So first one was the tax piece. Second one, I would term it as being aware of your marital status, whether you're single, married, widowed, widower.
Be aware if you're married or not. Like, you should know that.
I don't know. I mean,
that just sounded, I know what you meant, but it just sounded funny.
So, being aware of how that can affect your benefit.
There you go.
Depending on, so one really extreme example of this would be, if you're single, it's pretty straightforward. If you were never married at any point in your life, then this is going to be very cut and dry. If you were married once and you're still married, the most extreme examples of this would be if we have one spouse that works outside the home and one that stays home and doesn't show an income, a traditional income, for a larger period of time. I would say that's the most extreme example. And it would get even more extreme if one of the spouses was significantly older than the other one. And that would be a scenario we run into where it may make sense for, if spouse A is the working spouse, it may make sense for spouse B to take 50% of spouse A's benefit rather than pursuing their own. And go down that path even a bit further. If a widow or widower, that changes even more significantly. So,
yep.
In fact, with this scenario before, where you can really get in the weeds with this, where you could have been divorced, not married to this person for 20 years. And as long as you don't get remarried, you can still collect on their benefits.
Yeah.
Which is kind of bonkers. So
yes.
When you think about it, right? And if you've been married multiple times, then you get to choose.
Yeah. So, I mean, to boil that down too, like, if you're single, your benefit is your benefit. There is no kind of nuance to that. If you've never been married, you've always been single, then you're just building your own benefit. And when you file, it's on your benefit. But if you're married or were married in the past, depending on statuses, you not only have access to your benefit, but you also have access to your spouse's benefit. And sometimes it's better for you to file based on their benefit than it is to file on your own.
Yep. And
so the math should always be ran. Is it better for me to take my own benefit, take my spouse's benefit? And to your point, if it gets even more complicated with divorce involved and things like that, or even the death of a spouse, looking into spousal benefits of an ex or a deceased spouse.
Yep. Awesome. Put a bow on that one. That's number 2.
All right. Number three would be similar to number 1, right? In terms of doing the tax math, so to speak, of how to set up your Social Security and frankly, the rest of your 1040 to be as tax efficient as possible. The third one would be same concept, but with the financial side of it, and running kind of those break-even analysis of when to file. So you can file anywhere from age 62 all the way to age 70. Full retirement age, and this matters for a couple of reasons, but full retirement age for the average people that it's somewhere between 66 and 67, depending on when you were born. And so without getting into a lot of details in this podcast anyway, if you got more questions on that, just ask. But it's somewhere between 66 and 67. Earlier you file, the less you get. The later you file, the more you get. It stops growing, so to speak, as a benefit at age 70. And so there's kind of that range. That said, obviously, the longer you wait, the more you get, Matt. Mm-hmm. But the longer you wait, the less total payments you're going to get.
Yep.
So what is the break-even analysis, Matt?
As of most recently, I have 79. So if you live beyond 79, then you would have been better off waiting. And that's taking it to the extreme.
Yep.
All the way till 70.
Waiting from 62 all the way to 70.
Yeah.
Is the extreme example. So filing at 62, I get a lot less benefit. And just for the math people out there, deferring from 62, beyond 62, from 62 until whatever your full retirement age is, there's a 7% annual increase in benefit. From full retirement age, which again is age 66 or 67 to 70, is an 8% increase in your annual benefit. And so it's growing at 7 or 8%, depending on the age that you are. So what you're saying is, I get less money at 62, but I get more payments. If I wait all the way to 70, so I missed 8 years of payments, that in 9 years it catches up?
Yes.
And so if you're going to live beyond the age of 79, we'll just say 80 because it sounds better.
That does sound better.
Okay. 79, 80 years old, with taking nothing else into account. If you just isolate Social Security, you're going to get more total money, summation of payments, total summation of payments. You're going to get more total money out of the Social Security system by age 79 if you defer as long as you possibly can.
Yep.
Now, obviously cash flow, some people can't afford to do that. Sometimes financially it doesn't make sense. Sometimes there's other circumstances relative to your cash flows or 1040 or whatever it may be that it makes sense to file early. But if you can afford to do it and it makes sense in your situation, filing at the age of 70, especially if you've got longevity in your family,
right?
You know, and your parents and your spouse's parents are living into their 90s and things like that. A lot of times it does make sense to take that payment later.
Sometimes people say they just want to spend the money too. So,
Exactly. I mean, bird in hand. You're telling me you're willing to give me a bunch of money right now and I got to wait. I get that too. And we have families that at the end of the day, sometimes the best financial decision is driven far more by behavior than it is by numbers.
Aligned with, yeah.
Yeah. You gotta weigh out both sides of that. And some people, especially ones that are really fearful of the Social Security system and is it going to be able to pay them? And I'd rather just get it out of there as fast as I possibly can. I understand that too.
But that doesn't mean you shouldn't run the analysis.
You should.
You should still go through the education.
And here's the good news. That analysis, that break-even analysis is actually really simple. That's not rocket science. Like we can run it for you. If you've never done it, let us run it for you. It doesn't take us that long. There's Social Security break-even analysis calculators out on the web. You can use those too, but more than happy to help any listener try to figure out not only the financial break-even analysis of when it makes sense for you and your spouse, possibly if you have a spouse, to file, but also to go through the second one that, backing up to mistake number 2, which is understanding spousal benefits, then backing into mistake number 1 of the tax analysis and how to get it as tax efficient as we possibly can.
Yes, sir.
Got it all.
I'm still stuck on the web. World Wide Web.
On.
AOL.
Yeah, the internets, as I like to call it. There's other mistakes that can be made. But what we're just trying to hope to impress upon you is, number 1, you shouldn't be that negative about the Social Security system. Yes, some things need to change for things to remain fully funded, but it just isn't as bad as most headlines would allow you to believe. Okay. And then from a mistakes perspective, just kind of giving you or alluding to some of the most common things that we see and things to think through. Of those 3, Matt, I would say the one that gets thought about the least is the tax one, which is why we put it number 1. Yep. It is the number 1 most common mistake is irrespective of taxes, people are filing and not understanding how it affects their 1040.
Absolutely.
So with that said, hopefully you learned a little bit about Social Security today. As always, thank you for joining us for this episode of Every Day is Saturday. We do some really fun episodes that are just more, life-driven, guest-driven. This is a very informative episode, but hopefully it was still interesting and you learned something. So thanks for joining us for this episode on Social Security. As always, please subscribe to the podcast if you have not already. Tell your friends, your loved ones that there's this super awesome financial podcast out there that you can listen to and learn stuff, have a little bit of fun along the way. Thanks for joining us for this. We'll see you next Saturday.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.